I still remember that morning like it was yesterday, the cold sting of the early sun on my face, the smell of wet grass from the sprinklers, and the faint hum of distant traffic rolling through our quiet suburban street. It was supposed to be just another normal Saturday. I had finally come home after being deployed overseas, ready to spend a few peaceful weeks with my family. My old black pickup truck, the one I'd driven since, before my military days, sat proudly in the driveway. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, full of memories, dust, and scars from years of service. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee when I heard the unmistakable metallic clank of a tow chain hitting the ground. My heart skipped. At first, I thought I was hearing things, but then, through the living room window, I saw it. A tow truck backing into my driveway, engine rumbling, a man stepping out, clipboard in hand, and behind him there she was, Karen. She was standing there in her bright pink robe, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her hair was perfectly curled, and her sunglasses reflected the morning sun like two small mirrors. She had that same smug expression I'd seen a few times before, the one that screamed, "I run this neighborhood." I opened the door and stepped outside, still holding my coffee. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to stay calm. She smirked and said, "Yes, actually, you can move this eyesore before we have it towed." The driver was already hooking the chain to my truck's axle. I felt my blood pressure rise instantly. "That's my truck," I said, setting the cup on the porch railing. "You have no right to tow it." She crossed her arms and replied sharply, "According to HOA regulations, oversized commercial vehicles are not permitted on residential driveways. I've warned you before." I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she just said. "Commercial vehicle? That's a private truck, my personal vehicle." I pointed at the military license plate. "Do you even see that plate? That truck's been overseas longer than you've been president of this HOA." She huffed, clearly annoyed. "Rules are rules," she said, glancing at the tow driver like she was giving a silent command. "Get it out of here." My pulse quickened. The tow driver looked hesitant now, his eyes darting between us. "Ma'am," he muttered, "this plate says," but she cut him off immediately, snapping. I said, "Tow it." I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the gravel. "Touch that truck," I said quietly, "and you're touching government property." The tow driver froze, visibly confused. Karen rolled her eyes and muttered, "Oh please, don't start with that military nonsense." I could feel neighbors starting to peek out from behind curtains and half-open doors. The quiet street suddenly felt heavier, full of eyes. My jaw clenched as I watched her scribbling something on her clipboard. "You're trespassing." I told her. I never received any warning. She looked up with that condescending grin. "You must have missed the memo. Maybe you were too busy pretending to be important." That hit a nerve. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "You have 5 seconds to unhook that truck," I said slowly. 5. The tow driver glanced at me, then at her. 4. My voice grew harder. 3. She laughed mockingly. "What are you gonna do? Call your army friends?" I didn't answer. I just pulled my phone out and started recording. 2. At that moment, everything froze. Her smirk faltered. The tow driver's hand hesitated on the lever, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. I panned my camera from her face to the truck, making sure I caught every detail. "You're being recorded," I said evenly. "You're authorizing the illegal towing of a vehicle owned and registered by the United States Army." The color drained from the driver's face. "Wait, this is a government vehicle," he stammered. "Not owned but authorized, yes," I replied. "It's part of an ongoing assignment. You tow it, you deal with the federal penalties." Karen looked caught off guard for a second but quickly tried to recover. "You're bluffing," she snapped. "You think you can scare me." I didn't respond. I just smiled slightly and said, "We'll see." The driver slowly began to step back, clearly unwilling to take the risk. But Karen wasn't done. She stepped closer to me, her perfume sharp and overwhelming. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "This neighborhood has rules. You military people think you're above them." I stared at her silently for a moment, then said softly, "You should be very careful about who you disrespect, ma'am." She frowned, confused by the calmness in my tone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Something in my expression must have told her that this wasn't a game anymore. The driver looked at me nervously and said, "Sir, should I?" But I cut him off with a nod toward the street. "Unhook it, now." He hesitated, then slowly began unwinding the chain. Karen started shouting again, waving her clipboard, but this time her words felt hollow. The neighbors had gathered now, some recording, some whispering. The whole street was alive with curiosity. I could hear snippets. What's going on? Did she really try to tow his truck? He's Army, right? The tension was suffocating, but beneath it all, there was something else, a quiet sense that things were about to take a turn she never saw coming. By the time the tow truck pulled away, the air was thick with murmurs. Karen stood at the edge of my driveway, visibly fuming, her arms crossed tightly. "This isn't over," she said coldly. I looked at her and replied, "You're right, it's not." Then I turned and went inside, pretending to brush it off. But truthfully, I was shaking not from fear, but from restrained anger. I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through the HOA bylaws she claimed to quote. There was nothing in there about personal pickup trucks being banned. In fact, there was a clause that explicitly exempted service members returning from active duty from vehicle restrictions for up to 90 days. She either hadn't read it or, more likely, didn't care. I decided then I wasn't letting this go. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the HOA office. The air smelled like air freshener and fake politeness. The receptionist looked up nervously when I mentioned Karen's name. "Oh, Mrs. Whitmore," she said quickly. "She's very active." "Yeah," I muttered, "I've noticed." I asked for the full meeting minutes, the violation logs, and a copy of every complaint filed under my address. She hesitated, but when I mentioned the words legal review, she printed them without another word. Back home, I laid the papers across my table. Every so-called violation, grass too long, mailbox crooked, vehicle parked too close to curb, all signed by her. No witnesses, no photos, just her signature. My jaw tightened. This wasn't about the truck, it was personal. 2 days later, I caught her in the act. I had installed a small motion camera on my porch just to keep an eye out. Around 6 a.m., I saw her walk up my driveway with that same clipboard, snapping fake photos of my yard. She didn't know the camera caught her. I watched the footage 3 times, disbelief turning into quiet satisfaction. The next morning, she confronted me again, this time at the mailbox. "Still haven't learned, huh?" she sneered. "You can't just play soldier and ignore the rules." I smiled faintly. "Actually, I've been doing some reading." Her expression shifted and she asked mockingly, "And I found out that what you're doing violates multiple HOA codes." I said calmly, "Falsifying reports, harassment, unauthorized property entry. You're not the law here, Karen." Her face flushed red. "You're threatening me," she barked. "No," I said quietly, "I'm warning you." That night, I sent everything, the video footage, her signed reports, and a timeline of events directly to the HOA legal board and copied the local precinct. I didn't even expect a response right away. But the very next day, I woke to a knock on my door. When I opened it, 2 men in suits stood there. "Mr. Harris," one said, "we're from the HOA board. We received your complaint." They asked to review the footage, so I played it for them right there in the living room. Karen's voice, clear as day, could be heard whispering, "Let's get this truck gone before anyone notices." Their faces hardened. "Thank you," one said quietly, "we'll handle this internally." But that wasn't the end of it. The following morning, Karen marched over again, her face red with fury. "You think you can humiliate me?" she yelled. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I stepped out onto the porch, calm but firm. "Neither do you," I said, "and I think it's about time you found out." The neighbors had started gathering again, phones out, sensing something was about to explode. "You want attention," I said, raising my voice so the crowd could hear. "Here's your attention." I held up my phone, playing the recording from the day she tried to tow my truck. Her voice echoed through the street. The neighbors gasped. Her expression shifted from anger to panic in seconds. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the phone from my hand, but I stepped back. "Touch me," I warned, "and you'll regret it." She froze. "You can't do this," she stammered. "I'm the HOA president." "Not for long," I said quietly. The 2 board members had pulled up behind her car at that exact moment. She turned and saw them, her face draining of color. One of them stepped forward, holding a document. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said formally, "effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation." Gasps rippled through the crowd. She looked around, her lips trembling, but no one spoke up for her. The same people she had bullied now stood in silent judgment. Still, I didn't smile. I just stood there, watching her realization sink in. This wasn't satisfaction, it was justice catching up. But what she didn't know yet, what no one knew yet, was that the story was about to take a turn that even she couldn't have imagined. Because just as she turned to storm off, something unexpected happened, something that left the entire neighborhood frozen in stunned silence. Her son's car pulled up. A silver SUV, spotless, clearly just detailed. He stepped out mid-20s, clean cut, wearing a crisp uniform that made my chest tighten for a moment. My instincts kicked in before my mind did. That posture, that patch, that name tag, it couldn't be. Karen spun around, relief washing over her face when she saw him. "Oh, thank God, Tyler. Tell this man he's insane. He's been harassing me." But the moment her son's eyes met mine, the air shifted. He froze mid-step, his jaw slightly open. "Sergeant Harris," he said quietly. Every head turned. Karen blinked, confused. "Wait, you two know each other?" He straightened immediately, snapping to attention without thinking. "Yes, ma'am," he said stiffly. Sergeant Harris was my commanding officer overseas. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the faint hum of a distant lawnmower, the flutter of a flag across the street. Karen's confident smile faltered as she looked between us. "Commanding officer," she repeated. Her son nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, ma'am, he led my unit." The crowd erupted in whispers. Karen's face turned pale. "Tyler, he's the man who Mom," he interrupted sharply. "Sergeant Harris is the reason I made it home." The words hit the air like a thunderclap. I didn't move, didn't speak. He took a step toward me and extended his hand. "Sir," he said, his voice steady but low, "I didn't realize you lived here." I shook his hand firmly, saying, "Good to see you again, Corporal." Karen's eyes filled with panic. Wait," she stammered. "You mean to tell me he's—" "Yes," her son said, "the same man who pulled me out when that convoy went south." A wave of murmurs rippled through the neighbors. She looked like she might collapse right there on the curb. "Mom," he continued, turning to her now, "you tried to tow his truck?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her son shook his head in disbelief. "Do you even realize what you've done?" he said quietly. "That truck, that's the same one he drove in the field." Her hands trembled, the clipboard slipping from her grasp and hitting the pavement with a dull thud. She looked at me, tears brimming in her eyes. For the first time, she didn't look angry, she looked small. The neighbors didn't say anything now. They just watched as her son put a hand on her shoulder, his expression stern but disappointed. "You need to apologize," he said flatly. She blinked at him, her voice shaking. I didn't know. That's the problem," he said. "You never try to." I didn't say a word. The entire moment felt unreal, almost cinematic. I could see the conflict in her eyes, pride fighting with shame, arrogance struggling against guilt. Finally, she looked at me and whispered, "I'm sorry." The words were faint, barely audible, but I heard them. I nodded once. "Just remember," I said quietly, "respect isn't about titles or rules, it's about humanity." She looked down, unable to meet my eyes again. Her son turned back to me. "Sir," he said softly, "if there's anything I can do to fix this." I interrupted gently. "You've done enough. Keep doing what you're doing. Lead with integrity." He nodded, and for a moment I saw the same young man who once followed me through chaos, now standing tall in front of his mother. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Karen stood there silently, staring at the truck she had once called an eyesore. Now it seemed like something entirely different to her, a reminder of what she'd misunderstood, of who she had judged without knowing. When I finally turned to go inside, I caught one last glimpse of her wiping her tears, her son beside her, whispering something that sounded like, "He saved lives, Mom, including mine." I didn't stay to listen. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the truck's hood, glinting off the metal like a quiet salute. And for the first time since coming home, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace.